It's Tuesday, it's 12:15 and we're live in Westminster. Joining me, local government minister and Boris Johnson supporter Rishi Sunak, Irish Senator Neil Richmond, who chairs the Senate's Brexit Committee, The Spectator's deputy political editor Katy Balls and the Daily Mirror's political editor Pippa Crerar. Tonight's BBC Tory leadership debate will be Boris Johnson's first serious date with detail.
Are you ready to face the cameras tonight, Mr Johnson?
But who will be joining him at 8 o'clock? All the candidates have to get at least 33 votes in this afternoon's ballot, so at least one of his 5 rivals will be knocked out.
I'm very much looking forward to the verdict of my colleagues. I think it's a very important day.
I'm feeling confident. I'm looking forward to a good debate with the other candidates later.
I'm feeling energised, but it's all down to how the MPs vote in the ballot.
And also, I'll be talking to the last governor of Hong Kong, Lord Patten, about the mass protests there in recent days. Let's start with the debate this evening. Pippa, who would Boris Johnson have most to fear from in tonight's debate?
Well, the debate, of course, is very different from the contest in general. And I think tonight, if Rory Stewart were to make it through, he's the one candidate throughout who's been having quite a go at Boris Johnson, actually, and seems very, very keen to try and pin him down on some of the detail. Now, Boris's team have made the decision to keep him away from scrutiny because they think he's so far ahead, he doesn't need the same exposure as his rivals, and they also don't want to provide the sort of what they describe as blue-on-blue attacks that Jeremy Corbyn could use to his advantage for ammunition at the next election. But we also all know that another reason why he's been kept away is because he has a tendency to stick his foot in it, and that will inevitably, because he's a front runner, garner much more attention than it might do otherwise. So it's going to be quite a fiery night, I think. We're all quite looking forward to it.
Get the popcorn out. Katy, who should he fear most?
I think Johnson allies would prefer it if neither Dominic Raab nor Rory Stewart were in this debate tonight, partly because I think compared to Dominic Raab, it means that your Brexit position is being pressed in terms of how exactly you plan to deliver what you're saying. And just in Rory Stewart, because there's a sense that he will really go for those attacks and really press him. I think the concern for Boris Johnson is he is going to be pressed on the details of his Brexit plan, and he's got a very broad coalition of supporters right now. But once he starts to give details, is he going to say something that might upset, say, Steve Baker or Robert Jenrick, the two different kind of sides of this debate?
How are you viewing the debate this evening if you're watching it?
With spectacular levels of interest. We can kind of watch it at a distance, but again, like people have said, the detail is extremely interesting to us, particularly from all the candidates, and we'd like to see them flesh out some of the commentary they've made with regards to Brexit, the withdrawal agreement and the backstop, and let's see where we go after the new Prime Minister comes into office.
I mean, Rishi, one of the questions raised actually by Pippa, Boris Johnson has so far managed to avoid much of the public debate. His campaign is going remarkably well. Why on earth is he taking part?
I think it's not right to say he's avoided debate. He's taken part in not one, not two, but 5 different debates in front of MPs already, these hustings. And these are people,
these are
MPs...
not public debates.
No, but these are MPs who do scrutiny for a living, right? The idea that you haven't been rigorously tested in that.
But my question is, why is he bothering with tonight?
Well, I think it's a great opportunity. As he's always said, actually, this is a staged process. At the moment, we're focused on MPs. That's broadening out. And he's always said he's open to doing these things as the process evolves. But I think tonight, what you're going to see is a fantastic opportunity for Boris to set out his stall. It's a one-nation vision for the country. It's inspiring, it's inclusive, and he can also talk about his track record of delivering when he was mayor in London, of winning elections and referendums, and how he can deliver Brexit. I think that will be appealing to people.
What's his strategy for taking on Rory Stewart?
I don't think Boris should be focused on any particular candidate. No? I think I would like to keep it positive. You know, what he should be doing is talking about his message, his agenda, what he's going to do to make people's lives better in this country, why he's the best placed person to beat Nigel Farage and Jeremy Corbyn, and just let people make their own mind up based on his positive agenda.
Well, let's have a look at some of the tactics. Fraser Nelson from The Spectator has tweeted Boris could get more than 150 votes today, and word is he's lending at least 15 MPs, that's very kind of him, to Jeremy Hunt, who he regards as a safe, low-energy opponent. Is that true?
No, I'm absolutely sure that is not true. People should vote for the person that they think is the best person to do the job. I'm sure that's what everyone will do and should do, and then what will happen will happen. I tend to believe that person is Boris Johnson, and as you've seen, he's already got a lot of support. If he breaks over that barrier tonight, that would be fantastic progress. And it's not just about the numbers, though. It's about the breadth of the coalition that Katie talked about, and it is important that you can attract support from all different parts of the parliamentary party, and that is what he is doing.
How is he going to satisfy both sides of the supporters who are backing him, half of whom think he is going to leave, come what may, with or without a deal at the end of October, and half who think he is going to go for a much softer Brexit?
Well, I think, first of all, it's not a bad thing that he's attracting support from all different types of people.
But how's he going to satisfy both of those?
Whoever the Prime Minister is has to be able to take this coalition of MPs with them on this journey, right? So whoever's job it is has to be able to attract both people. The fact that he's done that already is a good sign of progress.
And when it comes to satisfying both of them, which camp are you in? Does he have to satisfy the ones by leaving, come what may, at the end of October? Or will he go either for an extension, a second referendum or a general election?
I think he's been very clear with everybody that his view is, rightly, that we should deliver on the result of the referendum. Of course, we should try and get a sensible negotiated agreement. That's in all of our interests. That's what he's trying to do. But if push comes to shove, and that is not possible at the end of October, the priority should be, if it's no deal or no Brexit, the idea should be we should leave, deliver on the result of the referendum, and make sure that the people's views are respected.
Well, Rishi is clear which half is going to be disappointed.
Well, I do think it's actually as straightforward as Boris Johnson setting out his strategy for Brexit in that way. Because if you talk privately to MPs on both sides, the two wings, they get quite different impressions from conversations, the many conversations he's had with them. And you speak to people on the sort of the hard Brexit side of the spectrum in the Tory party, and they're quite clear that he committed to them. Someone said this publicly on the record, as you know, that he's committed to them that come what may, deal or no deal, we'll be leaving the European Union on October 31st. Switch to the other wing of the Tory party, the sort of the soft Brexit side or former Remain side, and the private conversations he's had with people there are much gentler and much more sort of about not just focusing on the negotiation and that being his priority, but don't worry, I understand the difficulties and the dangers of crashing out without a deal, and that, don't worry, a nod and a wink, we're not going to let that happen. And when it comes to it, and he's tested one wing of the Conservative Party, that very sort of fragile coalition that Katie mentioned, is going to be disappointed, and the coalition's going to fall apart.
I mean, I think, as you talk to these people, and they're my friends and colleagues as well, what they want, they might have voted Remain, but they realise now we have to deliver on the result of the referendum. They're glad that he's committed to doing that. They recognise that he is trusted by the country to do that in a way that others aren't. But what they want on no deal, I think what they want, and when you speak to them, they want reassurance that the Prime Minister knows that it is not an insignificant occurrence. It will require work and preparation, and there will be disruption. They want someone who's honest about that, which Boris is, and they want someone for whom that is not their primary objective. And again, he said his primary objective is to get a deal, but we must be prepared to countenance that in order to get that good deal.
Can the Irish backstop be renegotiated in the way the candidates are saying?
Absolutely not. And we've been quite clear the negotiations ended in November, and it's something that's been quite stark over the past 5 or 6 weeks. And to be honest, it's not just the Conservative leadership contenders, but Jeremy Corbyn came over to Dublin a fortnight ago, had a meeting with our Taoiseach and said, we're going to get a better deal. And he said, no, this is the deal. It's closed. And I think people really need to realise that this is a two-way thing. It's about the European Union and it's about the UK. It's not just about, be it Westminster or indeed the Conservative Party.
Right, I'm going to invite Damien Hinds, Education Secretary and also supporter of Michael Gove in this contest, to come and sit down. While you're doing that, Rishi, let me just show you this tweet by David Gauke, Justice Secretary. He is basically saying that every Telegraph column by Boris Johnson increases spending by billions. I'm the last person, says David Gauke, to want to curtail the leadership race, but as I say, every Telegraph column by him increases borrowing by billions, and he is referring to the rollout of full fibre broadband by Boris Johnson to all homes by 2025. 8 years ahead of schedule. The government website said to achieve that by 2033 would cost in the region of £30 billion. How much does Boris Johnson's scheme cost?
Well, I'd say, actually, I think it's an exciting ambition to make sure that every home in this country has fibre. Spain is leaps ahead of us already, and we should be doing better.
And
but there are different ways to do it, because the private sector actually can do a large amount of that if it's incentivised in the right way, so the money doesn't have to fall onto the taxpayer. There are hard-to-reach rural areas and left-behind towns, which Boris has said should be a priority.
What's the region? Are we talking in the region of 20 billion, 30
that
billion?
should be a priority. But I think the point is, there's a 20 £3 billion war chest that has been built up by the strong government over the last few years, strong financial management. It's right that these leadership candidates express a priority for them as to where that money should be spent. And education funding and broadband are the right kind of priorities.
So fiscal conservatism's gone out the door, hasn't it?
No, debt will still be falling as a percentage of GDP. This is headroom that we've built up because of that careful financial management.
Is this based on you staying in the EU or crashing out or leaving on a deal?
Well, part of these things go together.
Managing that is very difficult, and this is our big concern in Ireland. We have to prepare for a potential of a no-deal scenario, and it's forcing us to produce 2 budgets in October. It's looking at our economy shrinking, not by our will, and I think it's very careful that if you're promising to spend money here or internationally, you realise that a no-deal hammers the UK economy, hammers the Irish economy, hammers the European economy. To have it as a policy objective, as some people, is extremely worrying.
Well, just to be crystal clear, it is not a policy objective. Boris has been very clear that that is not the policy objective, and I think you're absolutely right. I mean, the IFO, the German institute, very respected, said the impact on the Republic would be 10 times the economic impact on the UK.
But you've just said you want to spend that war chest.
And I think that is true. Hopefully,
don't talk over each other. Let
hopefully we can all come to a sensible agreement.
Clarification. That's an impact in the first 6 months of a no deal. Over the longer period, of course, the impact is much greater on the United Kingdom. And I think it's very important to say that. It's very important to be accurate and make sure that we know very well that it will be extremely damaging to our economy. We're not exactly very happy with the situation, but the UK will be the party that suffers the most in a no-deal scenario.
Hopefully we can all avoid it by good renegotiated...
No, by the same
Well, on that optimistic note, Damian Hinds, welcome. What does Michael Gove have that the others don't?
Michael Gove has the right mix of experience, having been tested, having been proven, having delivered really important domestic reform, having always been a realist on Europe while absolutely believing in the need for Brexit and all the advantages that can come from it. These are serious times. We need a serious leader. We need somebody who's ready to become Prime Minister and be there and do it 100% from day one. That person is Michael Gove.
How likely is it looking, Katie, that he is going to progress to the next round? Will he lose votes?
I think there's a sense that he should make it through today. Now, we are getting near to that vote, but I think the problem for Michael Gove is he has lost momentum in this campaign. After the Owen Bennett biography and Michael Gove's drug submission, he lost momentum at a time when lots of the endorsements were coming out, and I think he struggled with that. It's very hard for Michael Gove to say that he is the cabinet candidate to go up against Boris Johnson. And if you look at the first ballot from last week, I think the problem for all of these cabinet candidates is there was no clear front runner among them. Jeremy Hunt came second, but only by a small margin. And I just think there's a sense that they found it hard to break through. And then Rory Stewart, because he is being the loudest, the most enthusiastic, is sweeping up all these nominations from the Matt Hancock team.
Right, and we can have a look there at the result of the first round ballots, and there you can see Michael Gove on 37. Damian Hinds, Rory Stewart does seem to have some momentum behind him and some cut-through, and that shows in the Times headline that we're going to put up for our viewers. Michael Gove has a thinly veiled jibe at Rory Stewart. Gove tries to knock out Stewart in Tory contest. What's he running scared of?
Well, I think X tries to knock out Y in contest is not unusual.
Well, no, but Rory Stewart
has to end up with one person.
But Rory Stewart was behind at 19.
Look, Rory's had a really good campaign.
He's done better than Michael Gove, really, in terms of cut-through.
Joe, give us a chance. You keep telling everyone else not to talk over each other. He's done different things. He's got cut-through. He's been innovative, and by the way, he's a great colleague, as all these contenders are. My argument is not what's wrong with somebody else. My argument is why Michael Gove is the best person to take on this job. And I think it's because of that mixture of vision, of experience, and have been able to get the job done on the number one thing which is facing in the very immediate term, which is, of course, leaving the European Union.
Are you disappointed, then, that David Liddington, the de facto deputy, is backing Rory Stewart? Andrea Leadsom's come out for Boris Johnson. Where are Michael Gove's new big-name backers?
Well, again, it's a bit like X beats Y in contest. Don't be too surprised when different people support different people. And am I disappointed they don't all support the person I support? Yes, of course I am. And I want more people to come on board for Michael today.
But no one else has announced.
That is what the contest is about. Well, hang on, you haven't got long to wait, Joe. We've got a ballot this afternoon. There's another debate to come, and then let's see if we need to have further rounds as well. But this is how a leadership contest runs.
Now, Rory Stewart had a crowd of around 400 during one of his talks yesterday at South Bank. Could Michael Gove drum up that sort of interest?
Michael Gove drums up a lot of interest all the time. But look, I'm not dissing Rory. I just said he's done some great things in this campaign. He's attracted new interest to our party, and that is all a good thing. I just think that Michael Gove is best placed to become Prime Minister.
All right, well, let's speak to Gillian Keegan. She's the Tory MP who is backing Rory Stewart. In the end, Damian Hinds is right. It will come down to numbers. And has Rory Stewart got them? He's only on 19 as a result of that first round.
Well, I very much hope so. Obviously, there has been momentum building for Rory because of his brilliant campaign. And, you know, who'd have thought there was a market for honesty in politics? But it seems that people really love it. And the event yesterday, you know, he had 400 people. He said about a couple of hours before, 400 people turned up, 43,000 people live streamed it. You know, he's catching some energy. So he's getting momentum. I hope colleagues see his broad appeal and reach and support him.
Now, do you know where he is in terms of support? Are you confident those numbers are there to get to 33?
Yes, if everybody says what they do, what they say.
Talking of honesty in politics, Pippa, what do you think about this momentum behind Rory Stewart? Are you surprised that he seems to have done as well as he has?
Well, I think from the off, he was the candidate who was most prepared to do things differently, and he's actually admitted himself that he's been taking things out of Jeremy Corbyn's playbook by going out and facing direct questions from the public. I mean, he did all his sort of little selfie videos, well, they weren't selfies, were they? But little videos all around the country, sort of, you know, spontaneous appearing rallies, and being prepared to sort of take on people, members of the public that contradict him and that challenge him. And so it seems like a very sort of fresh style of politics. Of course, it isn't. Maybe it's fresh style within the Conservative Party. And as a result, he's attracted a lot of attention and interest. And, you know, in campaigns like this, when momentum goes with one candidate, it can be very hard to sort of stop that. And I sort of was speaking to a few people from Boris Johnson's campaign about Rory Stewart, and you know, Boris Johnson has always been known as like the disruptor in politics. He's the one that does things differently. He's the one that says things that nobody else says, and it's kind of like quite uncomfortable position for them, because here's somebody coming. I'm not saying he's outflanking him. Boris Johnson is clearly the front runner
way
here.
ahead.
But here's somebody that's sort of like, you know, saying some quite interesting things and making them maybe have to think about whether their strategy at the next stage of keeping Boris Johnson under wraps and not letting him be himself and getting out there and attracting the public is the right one.
I went along to Rory Stewart's event yesterday, and having been to various these leadership launches, now this was dubbed his final rally before the vote, but it definitely did have a different vibe to it, and it was I would say a youngish crowd, lots of fake flowers, the area it was in. But I think the problem for Rory Stewart still is the sense that he has to appeal to the membership, and I think that was something that is slightly missing when you follow some of these events. I don't think that's necessarily landing yet.
Right, well, that's the point, isn't it, Gillian Keegan? Even if he were to make it through, he's not going to appeal to grassroots members. In fact, he's positively unpopular with them. According to the poll, it was only 31% who thought he would be a good leader. Why?
Well, don't underestimate our membership. I had a pub tour meeting on Friday with a lot of members. Only 2 were backing Boris. And when I said, I explained my process that I'd gone through and that I was backing Rory, a number of them went, yes, you know, they were really delighted. So don't underestimate them. Don't characterise them. What they are is they're quite thoughtful and intelligent people. They'll ask questions. They'll get to detail. The brilliance of Rory's campaign is it's honest. He hasn't overpromised, so he can't under-deliver. And however you try and scrutinise from whatever angle, he has a really clear answer because it's based on honesty.
Well, let's go.
An honest assessment.
You say it's an honest assessment, and he has an answer for any question that's put to him. But he was actually more supportive of the withdrawal agreement of Theresa May than she was, in fact. So what is it about that deal that he was so supportive of that he thinks is going to be any more popular in Parliament under a Rory Stewart Prime Minister than it was under Theresa May?
Well, if you look at those 597 pages, and I think I've been a big supporter of that deal as well, every leadership candidate voted for that deal. 90% of Conservative MPs voted for that deal. That deal is actually not that controversial at all. About 590 pages are just common sense, and then this backstop has been the bit that's controversial, and it depends how you assess risk of that. But actually, what's changed since then is 2 things. We've had a number of elections where neither the Labour or Conservative Party, both of whom are the only 2 parties who pledged to actually implement the Brexit decision in Parliament. 5 parties have gone on a manifesto saying they're not going to respect the referendum result. It's up to those 2 parties to deliver it. In a hung Parliament trying to do Brexit, It's not that Brexit's the problem. Neither is that deal really the problem. The problem's the hung Parliament.
Right.
You have to unblock Parliament.
Right. Do you agree with that, Damian Hinds?
Do I agree you have to unblock Parliament?
No. Do you
Yeah,
agree
I do.
that actually... No, but do you agree that the deal actually isn't as unpopular as Gillian Keegan says, and actually things have changed and you could get that deal through?
I think Gillian was right in a great deal of what she just said. I mean, you've got to look at what the alternatives are. Okay, so at the moment there's a risk that you kind of take a sharp turn one way towards a no-deal Brexit, or a sharp turn another way towards Parliament trying to reverse the decision of the British people. Either of those things would be a bad outcome. So you need a middle way. You need an arrangement which is balanced, which does deliver on the referendum, but does so in a way which is good for the economy. And that, yes, does mean something not a million miles away from the deal that we've all been supporting. Let's be clear, we have all been supporting in Parliament, almost all of us in the Parliament.
Except Parliament, of course.
Those of us who are here. Yeah, but Parliament, it's been mostly, by the way, Labour Party MPs who've been stopping this getting through Parliament, not Conservative MPs.
But that may not change with a different Prime Minister.
Ultimately, we are going to need to get something through Parliament. And this idea that's been floated to just get around Parliament, that is a very bad idea and would set a very bad precedent indeed. We're a parliamentary democracy.
Michael Gove has said that he would look for another extension if it was a case of just sort of tying up the deal. Would you be happy to give a further extension, Neil Richmond?
I think within the EU27 the Irish government would be. However, we can no longer count on that as a guarantee from our European colleagues. Right. And we need a really, really good reason for an extension. And what Donald Tusk said in April when this extension was granted was to use this time wisely and to use this time realistically. Be realistic that the withdrawal agreement, as it stands, including the backstop, is the only manner for the UK to leave the EU in a managed way.
Right. I mean, Gillian, Rory Stewart has ruled out no deal. He's ruled out another referendum and he's ruled out negotiating a vastly different deal. So he's put forward this idea of a citizens' assembly, but what's the point of a citizens' assembly if he's still looking at the same deal?
Well, I mean, he hasn't ruled out trying to get some changes within the deal, but he's not basically saying that that's going to change everything because, as we've just heard from Senator Richmond, it's highly unlikely not to be on offer. So one has to make assumption, and when one's testing leadership, you have to make the assumption that the bluebird doesn't happen, that these miraculous things that everybody's tried before
so what's
suddenly
the point
don't
of the citizens'
appear.
assembly then?
So what he's basically saying is the problem is we need to unblock Parliament, and it's actually party politics and actually up to now probably a bit of opportunism as well, which has stopped people wanting to vote for this. So to do that, this kind of Brexit assembly or grand jury or whatever would basically be people who would look at this deal and take evidence and just basically shine a light and say, is there actually anything wrong with this? Is it worth, for the sake of the fact that 30 people in Parliament didn't support it, is it worth doing something so drastic as no deal, which affects thousands of businesses and millions of people, just because 30 people don't think it's reasonable? Is it fair? Did they really have a point? That is what it will answer.
All right. I mean, the Irish Citizens' Assembly on abortion, one of the Citizens' Assembly, took about 18 months. Do you think that this could really feasibly be done in a matter of weeks?
Well, it's far from me to say. I can explain our situation. It was a bit different. The abortion issue had hung over us for about 35 years. It was the most contentious issue in Irish politics for quite some time, and we've used the Citizens' Assembly for a number of things, and it looked at it most importantly before the referendum. We do referenda a lot. We've had some twice. And what we've done is we had a look at 100 citizens taken at random by a polling company, met with politicians, crucially, and thrashed out what exactly was the appetite. We removed the near total bar on abortion, but what can we put in? But also in the Irish situation, it wasn't just a Citizens' Assembly. It then went to a parliamentary cross-party committee, both houses, for a calendar year as well. It was a long process. It's very effective. It is actually very successful when you're looking to unblock something. It can be if it can be fast-tracked, I wish the British people well with it.
Feasible, Rishi?
I think the best thing is to just get a renegotiated deal. I think Boris is the best person placed to be able to do that. I think when he negotiates with Europe, there's a change dynamic. They know he's someone who passionately believes in Brexit. And indeed, they know for the first time they'll be meeting across someone on the other side of the table who is genuinely prepared to walk away should that become necessary.
You say nothing's going to change?
Within the withdrawal agreement, nothing has changed. Our negotiating team has been disbanded. It's the future relationship. It's only standing at the document is only standing at 35 pages. That's where we can provide more detail. We have always said that we get the withdrawal agreement, we enter into a transition period, then we negotiate the deep and meaningful trade, customs and regulatory relationship, which means we don't ever want to see the backstop come into place, that the alternative arrangements. If you can find them, all well and good, but there aren't any existing.
So what's the so what is the
think
strategy?
when we get to the point where the EU is confronted with the reality that it's either no deal
Hang on,
or
Neil.
a renegotiation. If I could just
Hang on,
finish.
Neil.
If the reality is, if it's either no deal or a renegotiated deal, we've had Michel Barnier say in the event of no deal they would look for alternative arrangements for the Northern Ireland border. So it seems sensible to look at them now to avoid that happening. And indeed, we just had an EU commissioner on the Today programme week before last saying this situation was as it was for the moment. And if the EU was staring down the barrel of no deal, then of course the decision would need to be made by the new Commission. There's a change dynamic in the European Parliament, and that's the question for the European Union. Why embrace the disruption of no deal, which nobody wants? We don't want it, Boris doesn't want it, and it's avoidable with some more constructive goodwill negotiating.
3 or 4 gross assumptions there. Firstly, the European Commission isn't really going to change that much. The European Council is the exact same, apart from Austrian elections in September. And the European Parliament, if we've seen anything, we've seen a greater pro-European voice with the rise of the Liberal movement. That is not changing. All those bodies have said the only way to withdraw a managed exit is with the withdrawal agreement. Things don't change just because the personalities changed. We went through nearly 3 years of torturous negotiations. It's something we didn't ask for. We're trying to facilitate it. But the British government, regardless of who's Prime Minister or what party's involved, has responsibility. Firstly, to the Good Friday Agreement. Secondly, to meet their responsibilities to the bill. And thirdly, to protect their citizens and our citizens.
Yeah, but we have had an EU commissioner here saying that is the case for the moment. The EU used to say it wouldn't countenance any extensions. The EU did say it wouldn't countenance any extensions at all. And then we had one. Then they said they wouldn't do any more. Then we had another. Then they said there could be no legally binding changes at all. But then we did have a legally binding codicil. Right. So I think we've seen bit by bit that the EU has walked back from its
viewers don't like
red
when you talk
lines.
over each other. We'll give you a chance to come back in.
Very crucial point, Joe, just to mention it. At the moment, the UK is leaving the EU under Article 50 of the Lisbon Treaty. If you decide to make the decision to crash out, that goes. All those guarantees go, and you go to Article 218 of the Lisbon Treaty. That's the change, and negotiating from that point is not anywhere as good as what we have.
Things do change if there is a new leader. I mean, it isn't the same, is it? You have a new person at the helm. You've gone through years of negotiations, as you have said, on this withdrawal agreement. You have stated on this programme clearly how bad for the Irish economy it will be if we end with no deal. Your intransigence is only quickening and speeding up that
I think trying to say that we're being intransient is grossly misleading. We never asked for this Brexit process. The British people, never came with a clear idea of what they wanted to achieve. We've been flexible, we've been compromised. The backstop itself is a compromise based on the British government's red lines. We have a deal. The European 27, a far-right government in Poland, a far-left government in Greece, have managed to keep a solid position. We want to work with the British people to have the closest possible future relationship.
But not reopen the deal.
But not reopen the withdrawal agreement aspect of it. Because that gives the guarantee, first and foremost, not to the economy, but to the peace in Northern Ireland.
Just before we say goodbye to Gillian Keegan, if you're still there, Gillian, reports about Rory Stewart being a spy. Have you asked him if he was a spy?
No, but I mean, honestly, can this guy get any better? He's now our very own James Bond. I mean, really? It's fantastic.
That's good spinning by you, Gillian Keegan.
It's true.
Thank you very much. Should you ask him?
He won't be able to tell me, clearly.
No, of course, the great get-out-of-jail card. Gillian Keegan, thank you very much. We're going to talk a little bit more about education in just a moment, but first of all, let's just remind you of tonight's debate.
The race to become our next Prime Minister is on, with the Conservative Party voting on their new leader in the coming weeks. Join me, Emily Maitlis, for a BBC debate as I challenge the candidates as they answer your questions. Our next Prime Minister, tonight, 8 p.m. on BBC One.
Damian Hinds, Education Secretary. Let's talk about education, because all the candidates seem to be falling over themselves to committing to spending more. An admission that this government and you just haven't spent enough on education.
Well, I'm really pleased, actually, that education has featured so prominently in the leadership campaign. I think it's very good to be able to debate these matters. And clearly, education has a very special, a very unique case, actually, for investment. Because it affects so much else in terms of our society, social cohesion, opportunity, spreading opportunity throughout our country, but also there's a very strong economic rationale for what we do in investing in education, for improving our productivity and growing our economy, growing people's wages. Therefore, that affords the great public services that we all rely on.
I understand that, but my question was the fact that it's being debated so intently by all the candidates and promises to spend more. Is that an admission? And do you agree that the government didn't spend enough and hasn't done?
I think it's a recognition, and I think this is recognised very widely among colleagues in Parliament, that funding in schools has been tight. We ask schools to do more than we used to ask them. And when I say we, I don't just mean we as the government, although it does include we as the government, but also we as a society. We expect more every year from education. We're more ambitious for the next generation than we were for the last, and of course that needs resourcing.
Right, so the cuts have gone too far. I mean, there seems to be agreement here when you listen to the debate, Pippa, that more money needs to be spent on schools in England.
We'll just have to make sure that we remind them of it when they finally decide who the Prime Minister is going to be, because my paper and the Labour Party in general have been saying for a very long time that more money needs to go into schools. And Damien's saying it's tight. Well, it's more than that for some schools. Some schools have really been suffering, having to shorten hours or having to lay off staff and not being able to provide all the extras that they'd want to do. And so it's fantastic if they're admitting that there's not enough money going in. Although I think the spread of offers from the variety of candidates varies hugely. I think Michael Gove said that he put £1 billion more into education. You probably correct me if that's wrong. And at the other,
that's the commitment from Michael Gove, is £1 billion.
Boris Johnson, really, it was pittance. Really, there was not anywhere near enough. And the IFS produced a report today which suggests that actually £3.5 billion a year more needs to go in just to reverse the cuts which have happened so far. So quite clearly, the admission has to be welcomed that there needs to be more money for funding, but it needs to go a lot further.
Is £1 billion enough?
So look, I will continue to make the case in government for investment in our education system. That applies to schools, it applies to colleges, it applies to the whole of our education system because of the unique importance of it in our society.
But is £1 billion commitment by Michael Gove, the man that you're supporting to be Prime Minister, enough to make up for the shortfall that you seem to have conceded on?
Well, Michael has talked about going back to the real terms per pupil position that was in place a couple of years ago and then maintaining real terms per pupil.
But that would be £1.8 billion. According to the Institute for Fiscal Studies, it would be £1.8 billion.
Well, there's a number of different figures going around. There's another figure out from the IFS as well, which I think is 3.8 rather than 3.5. But that includes some money for local government, which Rishi knows a lot about. There's a number of, as I say, a number of different formula, a number of different sets of numbers going about.
But I'm asking what you would like.
The important thing is that we have the right amount of money, enough money to be able to support what schools do and to support the greater ambitions that we have for education and for the next generation today than ever we've had in the past.
Is that more than £1 billion in terms of spending on schools that Michael Gove is committed to spending?
Well, we will go through, as we always do, in public spending, and any minister from any party and any government in history would tell you this. You go through a process. In that process, I am making, and I have been making a strong case for education.
Right. Boris Johnson has pledged to increase secondary school spending to £5,000 per pupil, but that is only £200 more than the government's current aim. Should it be more?
No, sorry, that's wrong on both counts.
Yeah, it is 5,000 spending.
No, so he was talking about, forgive me, I'm not here to speak for the Boris Johnson campaign, but he was talking about the floor level. You were also talking about the floor level. The average is different. The average is high.
Should he spend more?
There are two different things there, and Damien's right to highlight this. One is about the distribution of the money, and we've been working hard to correct some of the unfairness in the current distribution system. And Boris's point there was that everyone at the bottom should be raised up to a minimum floor level to close some of that inequality amongst schools.
That's not spending much more, is it?
And he's more broadly made the point about education in general. And I would point you to his track record in London, where the London Challenge, and it was not just about money.
That was a Tony Blair project under New Labour.
And delivered by a Conservative Mayor, Boris Johnson, for 8 years. I'm a paid tribute to people who put it in place.
London Challenge happened in the early 2000s. Boris Johnson can't claim responsibility for the London Challenge.
Hang on. But when he was mayor, he was responsible for the London Challenge, and so you should judge him on that record. And there is a fantastic improvement in schools in London during that time with a bunch of different reforms.
All right.
And I think what hopefully people take away from this, and Damien's absolutely right, is that as Conservatives, we believe that education is incredibly important. It's the best way to spread opportunity. The fact that all the candidates are talking about it.
Yes, but are they actually going to put their money where their mouth is? Well, hang on.
And that is the message
I'll tell you the person who is committing to spend the most, and that's Theresa May. And Theresa May is saying she wants to spend £27 billion in some sort of legacy spending on education, which would be £9 billion a year. None of the candidates are getting close to that.
No, I think there's a sense that if Theresa May manages to do this, and there is a funding row at the moment about this, is there going to be much left for these leadership candidates to pledge on education? And we've seen reports of this there's a lot of ministers, I think Philip Hammond is one of them, who really don't think that Theresa May should be making such a large spending commitment, given that she's binding the hands of her successor. I think there's a lot of bad blood about it. I think there is a sense just on a political level that if you are going to spend that much money, that it should be a leader who is going to get a boost from it, where there is a sense that actually Theresa May is trying to build herself a legacy right now. And this is be part of her legacy, perhaps, because it's not delivering Brexit, but is that the right way to do it?
Right. Damian Hinds, do you back Theresa May's pledge to spend £27 billion over 3 years on schools and education?
Well, Joe, I know there's been speculation in some newspapers over the last few days. I think you always have to be a little bit careful with responding to speculation in newspapers and repeating it on the telly as you know, as established fact. We have discussions the whole time within government about our priorities, and education is an absolute priority of the government. That's very clear with Theresa May, as with the rest of the government. And as I said a few minutes ago, you know, I have made and will continue to make the case for investment in education. That's largely about schools, that's the biggest part, but it's also about other areas of the education area as well. All
right, Damian Hinds, thank you very much. Thank you for joining us. I'm going to welcome in a moment Chris Patten, Hong Kong's last governor. He's also former chairman of the BBC, former chairman of the Conservative Party. He is going to come on. Thank you very much for being here. And just on the issue of Hong Kong, looking at the scale of the protests that we have seen there, what do you make of it over this controversial extradition law?
I think it's extraordinary. And if you're looking at how the responses are, whether when you look at those who've been arrested over it, whether it be releases, and you can see that the legislation which in a way triggered all this is now being rowed back on. But I think there are serious questions about the long-term and short-term effects of those who've been caught up in these protests.
What do you make of the scale of the protest? We'll be showing our viewers the pictures there, and the strength of feeling over this extradition law, and actually the success they've had in putting pressure on Carrie Lam.
Yeah, I think that for me, you'll understand that if I feel quite emotional about what's happening, and if I contrast what's happening there, where people are so serious about the fundamental things in life, with the slightly delusional drivel which politics in this country has come down to. So I feel very strongly about it, and I wish that the British political caste was rather more serious about how we deal with it, both by hauling the Chinese ambassador in to complain about the fact that he said the joint declaration doesn't apply anymore, also by making it clear that we think that the government in Hong Kong should withdraw, not just suspend the extradition agreement, by pressing for a public inquiry into the way that police have handled the demonstrations. And I hope that the Prime Minister, in one of her last acts as Prime Minister, when she goes to the G20, will complain explicitly to President Xi Jinping about what's been happening.
Right, so you obviously don't think the government has taken a tough enough line. There is a Chinese delegation here on trade at the moment. I mean, how tough do you think Philip Hammond should be? Should he use it as an opportunity to talk about this?
The former Australian Prime Minister, whom I didn't always agree with about issues like climate change, Tony Abbott, once asked what the attitude of the world was to China, said it was driven by fear and greed. And I think there's been an element of that, more than an element of that, in the way that we've dealt with Chinese delegations, not just the last one. The truth is that the Chinese do business by and large on the same basis as everybody else. They get what they want at the best price, they invest in the things they most want, and at the margins, politics is allowed to play in. But if you allow people to bully you, they go on bullying you.
I mean, when you look at what is happening now, and you've said yourself about the declaration, the joint declaration, do you think the one country, two systems principle is now in serious jeopardy?
I do, particularly if this law goes through, because what it does is to remove the firewall between the rule of law in Hong Kong and what passes for the law in China, which you can see operating in Xinjiang, for example. There was a wonderful broadcast by the BBC correspondent about what's happening in Xinjiang this morning on the Today programme. So I do think that is pretty fundamental. One country, two systems worked pretty well for about 10 years after 1997. Not perfect, some things were, democracy was throttled back a bit, but by and large it worked pretty well. It's gone really bad since the demonstrations in 2014, which I think spooked China and made them much tougher on Hong Kong.
Let's talk about the TV licence fee for over 75s. What do you make of the BBC's decision announcing to scrap that for most over 75s?
I think it was a rotten part of the last settlement. I don't think I would have, if I'd still been the regulator, I don't think I'd have ever been prepared to go along with it. The BBC is a great public service broadcaster. We should be spending more on the BBC. We shouldn't be actually expecting it to behave like an aspect of the Social Security Department.
Right. I mean, what do you think of the previous Conservative government's role in those negotiations, then?
I think it was a pretty smart bookie's trick by George Osborne, who I much admire in many ways, but I think that was a real piece of sleight of hand, and I don't think the BBC should have bought it for a moment.
Well, this is something that we at the Mirror have been campaigning on for this £745 million cost of it. I mean, it's not a small amount of money for the government to step in and bridge that, because the BBC obviously has huge commitments elsewhere, and faced with the decision of where priorities should lie, has decided that they should be means tested. So not only do I agree with you that it shouldn't be something for the BBC to make a decision on, I think the government should go further and take back the responsibility for providing what is actually an essential lifeline to probably about more than 3 million OAPs.
Let's turn to the leadership contest.
Oh, God, do we? I suppose, yeah.
Yes, we absolutely do have to talk about it. Chris Patten, who are you backing?
Well, if I was going to vote, I'd vote for the only candidate who I think is actually telling the truth, and that's Rory Stewart. I mean, the Irish minister, the Irish senator was earlier, I was listening from outside, was saying some things which are perfectly true. All the other candidates following Alice in Wonderland seems to think you can believe 6 impossible things before breakfast. And the idea, for example, that Boris is going to turn up in Europe after what he's called the European Union, comparing it with the Soviet Union, for example, and people are going to roll over and say, the backstop doesn't matter anymore. The best way of getting out of the backstop would be to stay in the customs union.
But what does it say about the view of Tory MP's judgment? I mean, he's running away with this contest at the moment. Aren't they right to back a proven winner, a winner in London, as he was?
Well, I think there'll be several ways of looking at his record in London. I think if the Conservative Party wants somebody who's built a career, frankly, I'm sorry to say this in front of the Minister, but has built a career out of lying, whether as a journalist or as a politician, a serial liar. I think there is certain questions about the moral space which he occupies, which I wouldn't want to go into. Somebody who called gays bum boys, somebody who called African children pickaninnies. I don't want that Prime Minister, and I think that one thing you could be sure about, is he would let down people to whom he'd promised things.
Rishi.
Yeah. I'm sad that Lord Patten feels that way, actually, and I think a lot of what you said was just simply not true. I mean, for a start, he didn't call the European Union Soviet Union. That was someone else, which we don't need to go into now. You made that comment about comments about people who were gay. Boris Johnson actually voted against the Conservative Party whip and the leadership when it came to a very important vote on Section 28, which you will remember well from your time. He was also the first most senior Conservative politician to come out in favour of gay marriage. So I think on that particular point you've just raised, his track record is actually very, very strong.
So why did he use that language?
And when it comes to accusing people of lies, which I think is actually a very strong statement, here's a person that twice in London and once in a referendum has managed to engage people in a way that Conservatives have not historically engaged them, persuaded them of our cause, and won when people thought we couldn't win. So he must be doing something right. And the record in London, which you disparaged, actually, is very successful. Crime down, transport investment up, businesses booming. It's a record to be proud of. And I'm sad that you as a Conservative can't acknowowledge that a Conservative mayor did a very good job during that time.
You're in favour of a second referendum. Is that right?
I would think that was better than crashing out with no deal, but I'm rather like Ken Clarke. I hate referendums. And I actually think that it would be better if Parliament resolved this itself. And I'm afraid that the only way round the backstop argument is by us being still in the customs union, which is why I moved amendments to that end when we were debating the withdrawal agreement. It is crazy to think that Brussels is going to roll over with a new Prime Minister, even one who compared the European Union, to the Nazis, not the Soviet Union.
All right, Rishi, finally, before we go.
That's it. I think tonight you're going to see a really positive, optimistic message from Boris about what he can do to transform people's lives in this country. His record speaks for itself. We won twice in London. We won a referendum. He's trusted to deliver Brexit.
And
we'll get on and deliver for everyone else too.
All right, thank you very much, Rishi. That's all we've got time for. The debate, of course, is this evening on BBC One at 8 o'clock. From all of us, bye-bye.
So Politics Live from yesterday was blocked because of ITV and Channel 4 because there was clips of the debate in it. Can you believe that? They literally blocked Politics Live, which is owned by the BBC. But it had clips on it from ITV and Channel 4, which we also contribute to as tax license payer fucking payers. So it got blocked by them. Fuck knows. So yeah. Oh well. 8 o'clock, I'll be back to stream the BBC debate thingy. I might be back at 6 to get the results because it might be on the news, so we'll find out. 6 o'clock, I think someone said in the side chat. So, yeah, I'll be back then, I guess. Yeah. I might be back at 6 just to see what the results are and give you a little stream for that before we do the 8 o'clock one. Anywho. Thank you all for watching. Enjoy the rest of your hours. Go make a brew or whatever. And I'll see you guys later.